The words hit me like ice water as I stood frozen outside Robert's study door. David, you need to face reality. Rachel is just a nurse. She's not worth throwing away your future for. My father-in-law's voice carried that familiar tone of authority, the same one he used when dismissing the housekeeping staff or talking down to waiters. But this time, he was talking about me, his son's wife, the woman who had spent the last 5 years trying desperately to earn his approval. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they could hear it through the mahogany door. David's response was quieter, but the hurt in his voice was unmistakable. Dad, she saves children's lives every day. How is that not worthwhile? Robert's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Come on, son. Any high school graduate can become a nurse. But you? You have a law degree from Harvard. You could be making partner at the firm, building something meaningful. Instead, you're wasting your potential playing house with someone who brings nothing to this family. I had come to surprise David with his favorite homemade cookies, thinking we could spend a quiet Sunday afternoon together at his father's estate. Instead, I was getting a brutal education in exactly what my husband's family thought of me. The conversation continued, each word landing like a physical blow. She doesn't understand our world, David. She never will. Look at dinner last week when the Ashfords were over. She had nothing to contribute to the conversation about the charity board expansion. She just sat there, completely out of her element. The memory of that dinner rushed back, making my cheeks burn with fresh humiliation. I had tried to share my thoughts about the Children's Hospital's need for better funding, but Robert had smoothly redirected the conversation to corporate tax benefits and political connections. Every time I attempted to speak, I was either ignored or politely dismissed with condescending smiles. Dad, Rachel works 16-hour shifts saving premature babies. Maybe she was just tired. David's defense of me should have felt comforting, but his voice lacked conviction. I could hear the years of conditioning in his hesitation, the lifetime of being told that his father knew best. Tired, or simply not equipped to handle adult conversations? David, I've watched her for 5 years. She's sweet enough, but she lacks sophistication. She lacks ambition. She's content to stay exactly where she is, and she'll drag you down with her. Standing in that hallway, wearing my favorite sundress and clutching a container of chocolate chip cookies, like some desperate 1950s housewife, I felt every insecurity I'd ever harbored about my place in this family crystallize into painful clarity. Robert Hartwell owned 3 successful law firms across the Pacific Northwest. His house in Portland's exclusive West Hills neighborhood was worth more than I would earn in my entire nursing career. His opinion carried weight in legal circles, political circles, social circles that I could never hope to enter. I know you think you love her, Robert continued, his voice taking on that patient tone reserved for explaining simple concepts to children. But love isn't enough for a marriage to succeed. You need partnership, shared goals, mutual respect. Rachel is a lovely girl, but she brings nothing to the table except her salary from the hospital. No connections, no family wealth, no social standing. Nothing that will help advance your career or enhance our family's reputation. The cookies slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the marble floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the cavernous hallway. I stared down at the scattered remains of my afternoon surprise, seeing them as a perfect metaphor for my marriage and my place in this family. No matter how hard I tried, how much love I poured into my efforts, I would always be seen as insignificant. 5 years earlier, I had walked into Riverside General Hospital as a nervous new graduate, clutching my nursing degree and hoping to make a difference in the world. The pediatric intensive care unit became my second home, a place where my skills and dedication were not only appreciated but desperately needed. I learned to read the monitors that tracked tiny heartbeats, to comfort parents facing their worst nightmares, to celebrate the small victories that meant everything in our world of life and death decisions. It was during my second year at Riverside that I met David Hartwell. He had been visiting his law firm's client, a family whose son had been injured in a car accident. I was assigned to care for 8-year-old Timothy, and David later told me that watching me work had been like witnessing a miracle. I had spent hours at Timothy's bedside, reading him stories, helping him with physical therapy exercises, and gradually coaxing smiles from a little boy who had forgotten how to hope. David started finding excuses to visit the hospital, bringing coffee for the nursing staff, or checking on Timothy's progress long after any legal matters had been resolved. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours in the hospital cafeteria, during which he listened with genuine interest as I explained the complexities of pediatric care, the emotional challenges of working with critically ill children, and my dreams of eventually specializing in neonatal intensive care. He seemed fascinated by my world, asking thoughtful questions about medical procedures, hospital policies, and the psychological aspects of treating young patients. When he finally asked me to dinner, I was surprised but delighted. David Hartwell was handsome, intelligent, and kind, but more importantly, he seemed to see value in what I did for a living. He never made me feel like my career was somehow lesser or unimportant. Our courtship was a whirlwind of stolen moments between my hospital shifts and his court appearances. David would pick me up after particularly difficult days, listening patiently as I processed the emotions that came with losing a patient or celebrating a successful surgery. He attended hospital fundraisers with me, donated generously to pediatric research initiatives, and even volunteered to help with holiday parties for the children who had to spend Christmas in the hospital. When he proposed, kneeling in the hospital chapel where I often went to find peace after losing a patient, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. David understood my calling, respected my dedication, and supported my career ambitions. I thought I had found my perfect partner, someone who valued the same things I did, and who would stand by me through whatever challenges life might bring. Meeting Robert Hartwell for the first time should have prepared me for what was coming. But love has a way of making us optimistic about impossible situations. The dinner took place at the Grand Oak, Portland's most exclusive restaurant, where Robert held court at his usual table like some kind of legal royalty. He was polite but distant, asking perfunctory questions about my background while clearly conducting some kind of internal evaluation. When I mentioned that I had grown up in a working-class family in Salem, that my father was a mechanic and my mother worked as a school secretary, I watched his expression grow noticeably cooler. When I explained my passion for pediatric nursing, describing the intensive training required and the complexity of caring for critically ill children, he nodded with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for weather conversations with strangers. The real test came when Robert began discussing his expectations for David's future. He painted a picture of political appointments, prestigious partnerships, and social obligations that would require the right kind of wife. Someone who understood the importance of appearances, who could navigate high society gatherings with ease, who came from the proper background and brought valuable connections to the marriage. Throughout this monologue, David squeezed my hand reassuringly under the table, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. This was his father, the man who had shaped his worldview and guided his career decisions since childhood. Robert's approval clearly mattered to David in ways that went beyond simple family loyalty. It represented validation of choices, confirmation of worth, and access to opportunities that only came through established connections. After that dinner, I threw myself into becoming the daughter-in-law Robert expected. I read books about wine and art, practiced making conversation about topics that interested his social circle, and attended etiquette classes to learn the subtle rules of behavior that seemed to come naturally to people born into wealth. I spent hours researching the charities Robert supported, memorizing names and accomplishments of his business associates, and learning to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed his world. The wedding was everything Robert wanted it to be, a grand affair at the Portland Country Club with 500 guests, most of whom I had never met.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The guest list read like a who's who of Portland society, filled with judges, politicians, business leaders, and social luminaries who represented the pinnacle of respectability and influence. I smiled graciously through endless introductions, accepted congratulations from people who clearly had no interest in getting to know me, and played the role of the perfect bride with exhausting precision. But even on my wedding day, I could feel Robert's disapproval simmering beneath his public facade of paternal pride. During the father-son dance, I watched him whisper something to David that made my new husband's shoulders tense with familiar stress. When David returned to our table, he was quieter than before, and when I asked what his father had said, he simply kissed my forehead and told me not to worry about it. The first year of marriage was a delicate balance between my demanding hospital schedule and the social obligations that came with being a Hartwell wife. Robert expected me to attend charity luncheons, gallery openings, and political fundraisers, events where I felt perpetually out of place despite my careful preparation. I would spend my days saving lives in the PICU, then rush home to change into evening wear for some society function where my presence was required but my participation was unwelcome. The conversations at these events followed predictable patterns. The wives discussed vacation homes, private schools for their children, and the latest fashion trends from their shopping trips to New York or Paris. When they asked about my work, their interest lasted exactly long enough for politeness, after which they would smoothly transition to topics that excluded me entirely. I learned to smile and nod, to ask appropriate questions about their children's activities, and to avoid mentioning the life and death dramas that filled my days at the hospital. David tried to bridge these two worlds, often staying close to my side at social events and attempting to steer conversations toward topics where I could contribute meaningfully. But I could see the strain this created for him, the constant need to manage his father's expectations while protecting my feelings. He was caught between two versions of his life, and I gradually realized that my presence was making his relationship with his family more complicated rather than enriching it. The breaking point came during my third year of marriage, when I was offered an opportunity to join the neonatal intensive care unit at Mercy Children's Hospital. It was everything I had dreamed of professionally, a chance to specialize in caring for the most vulnerable patients and to work with cutting-edge medical technology. The position came with increased responsibilities, longer hours, and the possibility of eventually leading the department's expansion into new treatment protocols. When I shared this news with David, his initial reaction was enthusiastic support. He understood how much this opportunity meant to me, how it represented the culmination of years of additional training and preparation. But when we told Robert about the job offer during our weekly family dinner, his response was immediate and devastating. "Absolutely not," he said, setting down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "David is being considered for junior partner at the firm. This is a crucial time for building relationships and establishing his reputation. He needs a wife who can support his career ambitions, not someone who will be working around the clock at some hospital." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but I tried to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Robert, this position would only require about 10 hours more per week than I'm already working. I've been managing my current schedule just fine while supporting David's career." His laugh was cold and dismissive. "Rachel, you clearly don't understand the demands of David's position. Junior partners are expected to entertain clients, to build relationships within the legal community, to be available for important social functions. How can David do any of that if his wife is constantly at the hospital changing diapers and taking temperatures?" The casual dismissal of my profession, reducing years of intensive medical training to changing diapers and taking temperatures, hit me like a physical blow. I looked at David, expecting him to defend my career as he had done so many times before, but he remained silent, his jaw tight with the internal conflict I had watched him struggle with for years. "Dad," he finally said, his voice carefully controlled, "Rachel's work is important. She's one of the best pediatric nurses in Portland. This opportunity at Mercy Children's Hospital would be a significant advancement for her career." Robert's expression didn't change, but his tone grew colder. "David, I think you need to consider what's truly important here. Your future, your family's reputation, your ability to provide the kind of life that befits a Hartwell. Rachel's nursing hobby might make her feel fulfilled, but it contributes nothing to your advancement or our family's standing in the community. Hobby. He had called my life's work, my calling to heal sick children, a hobby. I sat there in stunned silence, watching this man who had never shown me anything but polite condescension reveal the depth of his contempt for everything I had dedicated my life to achieving. In that moment, I understood that no amount of effort on my part would ever change his opinion of me or my worth as a member of his family. That night, David and I had our first real fight as a married couple. He tried to explain his father's perspective, to help me understand the pressures and expectations that came with being part of a prominent legal family. But his attempts at diplomatic explanation only highlighted the fundamental divide that was growing between us. He couldn't fully defend my career without betraying his father's vision for his future, and he couldn't support his father's demands without diminishing the value of everything I had worked to achieve. "David," I said, my voice steady despite the tears I was fighting back, "do you think my work is just a hobby? Do you think what I do doesn't matter?" His hesitation before answering told me everything I needed to know. The man I had married, who had once been fascinated by my dedication to healing sick children, was beginning to see my career through his father's eyes rather than his own. "Of course your work matters," he finally said, but his words lacked the conviction they had once carried. "But Dad has a point about timing. Maybe this isn't the right moment for such a big career change. Maybe we should wait until I'm more established at the firm." I accepted his reasoning that night, telling myself that marriage required compromise and that supporting David's career ambitions was part of being a good wife. I declined the position at Mercy Children's Hospital, watching my dreams of professional advancement slip away in favor of maintaining peace within the Hartwell family. But something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of my place in this marriage and this family. The years that followed were a slow erosion of my confidence and self-worth. Every social function reinforced my status as an outsider. Every family dinner included subtle reminders of my inadequacy, and every conversation about our future centered on David's career while mine became increasingly irrelevant. I continued working at Riverside General Hospital, but I stopped pursuing advancement opportunities, stopped attending professional conferences, and gradually stopped believing that my contributions to the world had any real value. The irony was that my work at the hospital became more important and more demanding during this period, even as my family dismissed it as inconsequential. The pediatric intensive care unit was expanding, taking on more complex cases, and implementing new treatment protocols that required additional training and expertise. I found myself working longer hours, handling more responsibilities, and becoming an informal mentor to newer nurses who looked to me for guidance and support. My colleagues at the hospital treated me with the respect and appreciation that was completely absent from my life as a Hartwell wife. Dr. Thompson, the head of pediatrics, frequently praised my clinical skills and my ability to connect with both patients and their families. Other nurses sought my advice on difficult cases, and parents specifically requested that I be assigned to care for their children during critical periods. But when I tried to share these professional victories with David, his responses became increasingly distracted and dismissive. He would nod politely while checking his phone or reviewing legal documents, offering generic words of encouragement that felt hollow and automatic. The man who had once listened for hours as I described my work now seemed irritated by any mention of hospital life that lasted longer than a few minutes. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month, filled with unspoken resentments and abandoned dreams. David threw himself into his legal career with renewed intensity, working longer hours and attending more social functions, often without me. When I couldn't attend due to my hospital schedule, he seemed relieved rather than disappointed, and I began to suspect that my absence made his social obligations easier rather than more difficult. Now, standing in Robert's hallway with broken cookies at my feet and my husband's betrayal echoing in my ears, I finally understood the truth that had been building for years. I was not a valued member of this family. I was an embarrassment to be tolerated, a mistake to be managed, a problem that David's father believed should be solved through divorce rather than acceptance. The conversation in the study was winding down, but Robert's final words sealed my fate in this family forever. "Think about what I've said, son. Rachel might be a perfectly nice person, but she's holding you back from becoming the man you're meant to be. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the greater good." I didn't wait to hear David's response. I couldn't bear to learn whether my husband would finally stand up for me, or whether he would continue to let his father's poison slowly destroy our marriage. Instead, I gathered the scattered cookies as quietly as possible, left them on the hall table, and walked out of that house knowing that my life as Rachel Hartwell was about to change forever. The drive home through Portland's winding streets gave me time to think clearly for the first time in months. Every conversation, every disappointed look, every casual dismissal now made perfect sense. I had been fighting a losing battle from the moment I married into the Hartwell family, trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I had none. But something had awakened in me during those devastating minutes outside Robert's study. For the first time in years, I remembered who I was before I became David's wife and Robert's disappointing daughter-in-law. I was Rachel Morrison, a skilled pediatric nurse who had dedicated her life to saving children. I was someone who commanded respect in my professional world, whose expertise was valued, whose contributions made a real difference in people's lives. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done trying to become someone I wasn't in order to please people who would never accept me. I was done sacrificing my dreams and ambitions for a family that saw no value in who I really was. Most importantly, I was done pretending that a marriage built on such fundamental disrespect could ever survive. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and drove to the hospital for what I knew would be a day that mattered more than any social function or charity luncheon I had ever attended. I had no idea that the events of that day would provide the perfect opportunity for David to finally prove his father wrong, or that a medical emergency would reveal the truth about my worth in ways that no amount of argument or explanation ever could. Walking into Riverside General Hospital that morning, I felt like I was coming home to myself after years of being lost in someone else's expectations. Whatever happened next, I was ready to reclaim my life and my identity, even if it meant losing everything I thought I wanted when I said I do 5 years earlier. The emergency alarm pierced through the morning calm of the pediatric intensive care unit like a thunderbolt, sending every nurse and doctor into immediate action. Code Blue, Room 314. Code Blue, Room 314. The announcement echoed through the corridors of Riverside General Hospital as I dropped my morning coffee and sprinted toward the source of the crisis. My white sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum floors as I navigated through the maze of medical equipment and concerned staff members who had materialized from every corner of the hospital. Room 314 housed Emma Chen, a 6-year-old girl who had been admitted 3 days earlier with complications from a rare heart condition. Her parents, Li and Wei Chen, had been maintaining a constant vigil by her bedside, their faces etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from watching your child fight for her life. Emma had been stable throughout the weekend, showing encouraging signs of improvement that had given everyone hope for a full recovery. But as I burst through the door of room 314, it was immediately clear that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Emma's small body was convulsing on the hospital bed, her monitors screaming warnings about dangerously irregular heart rhythms and plummeting oxygen levels. Dr. Thompson was already at her bedside, his experienced hands moving swiftly to assess the situation, while nurses scrambled to prepare emergency medications and life support equipment. The child's mother was pressed against the far wall, her hands covering her mouth in horror as she watched her daughter's life hang in the balance. Her father stood frozen beside her, his face ashen with the realization that all their hopes and prayers might not be enough to save their little girl. The raw terror in their eyes was something I had witnessed countless times before, but it never became easier to bear. Nicole Rodriguez, my closest colleague and friend in the PICU, was already at Emma's side, her hands steady as she prepared the cardiac monitors that would be crucial for tracking the child's unstable condition. We had worked together for 3 years, developing the kind of wordless communication that comes from shared experience in life and death situations. With a single glance, I understood exactly what needed to be done and how we would coordinate our efforts to give Emma the best possible chance of survival. Dr. Thompson's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority as he began issuing rapid-fire instructions to the assembled medical team. "We need to get her stabilized immediately. Rachel, I need you to start a second IV line while Nicole monitors her cardiac rhythm. Karen, call the cardiac surgical team and tell them we may need emergency intervention." This is exactly the kind of complex situation that our PICU specialized in handling. But even with all our training and experience, there were no guarantees when dealing with pediatric cardiac emergencies. My hands moved with practiced precision as I located a viable vein in Emma's tiny arm, despite the difficulty posed by her convulsions and the urgent time pressure. Years of experience had taught me to remain calm under pressure, to focus entirely on the technical aspects of my job, while compartmentalizing the emotional weight of what was happening. The IV line slid into place smoothly, providing us with the access we needed to administer the emergency medications that might save Emma's life. As I secured the IV and began preparing the cardiac stabilization drugs, I became aware of a commotion in the hallway outside room 314. Raised voices and hurried footsteps suggested that word of the emergency was spreading throughout the hospital, drawing curious onlookers and concerned colleagues who wanted to offer assistance. Among the voices, I recognized one that made my heart skip a beat with surprise and confusion. David's voice carried through the doorway, urgent and worried as he spoke to someone in the corridor. "What's happening? Is there anything I can do to help?" His presence at the hospital was completely unexpected, given that he typically avoided medical settings and had never shown interest in visiting me during my work hours. For a moment, I wondered if something had happened to Robert, or if there was some family emergency that required my immediate attention. But there was no time to process David's unexpected appearance, or to wonder about his reasons for being at Riverside General Hospital on a Tuesday morning. Emma's condition was deteriorating rapidly, her heart rhythm becoming increasingly erratic despite our initial intervention attempts. Dr. Thompson's expression grew more serious as he reviewed the cardiac monitor readings, and I could see him mentally calculating the risks and benefits of more aggressive treatment options. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of intense medical activity as our team fought to stabilize Emma's condition. We administered a series of cardiac medications, adjusted her oxygen support, and monitored her vital signs with the kind of focused attention that excluded everything else from our awareness. The child's parents remained pressed against the wall, holding each other tightly as they watched us work to save their daughter's life. Throughout the crisis, Nicole and I functioned as a perfectly coordinated unit, anticipating each other's movements and seamlessly managing the complex array of medical equipment and procedures required to treat Emma's condition. When Dr. Thompson called for specific medications, I had them prepared before he finished speaking. When the cardiac monitors needed adjustment, Nicole was already making the necessary changes. Our teamwork was the result of years of training and experience, but more importantly, it reflected our shared commitment to giving every child in our care the best possible chance of survival. Emma's condition began to stabilize around 10:30, her heart rhythm gradually returning to a more normal pattern as the emergency medications took effect. The terrifying convulsions stopped, her oxygen levels improved, and the screaming alarms finally fell silent. Dr. Thompson allowed himself a small smile of relief as he reviewed the latest monitor readings, nodding with satisfaction at the dramatic improvement in Emma's vital signs. The child's parents rushed to her bedside the moment Dr. Thompson indicated it was safe to approach, their faces streaked with tears of relief and gratitude. Li Chen grasped my hand tightly, her voice breaking with emotion as she thanked me for helping to save her daughter's life. Wei Chen stood beside his wife, his own eyes filled with tears, as he struggled to find words adequate to express his appreciation for our medical team's efforts. As the immediate crisis passed and Emma settled into a peaceful sleep, I became aware once again of the voices in the hallway outside her room. David was still there, and now I could hear Robert's unmistakable baritone joining the conversation. Their presence at the hospital during such a critical moment was mystifying, but I was too emotionally drained from the morning's events to give it much thought. Nicole touched my shoulder gently, her expression reflecting the exhaustion we both felt after the intense medical emergency. "You were incredible in there, Rachel. The way you anticipated every need, the speed of your IV placement, the calm way you handled the parents. Dr. Thompson couldn't have asked for better support." Her words of recognition meant more to me than she could possibly know, especially after the devastating conversation I had overheard at Robert's house the previous day. Dr. Thompson approached us as we finished updating Emma's medical charts, his face showing the relief that comes after successfully navigating a life-threatening emergency. "Rachel, I want to thank you personally for your exceptional work today. Your quick thinking and technical skills were crucial in stabilizing Emma's condition. Without your immediate response and professional expertise, we might have lost her." His praise felt like a balm to my wounded spirit, reminding me of the value and importance of my chosen profession. As we walked out of room 314, I was surprised to find David and Robert waiting in the hallway, their faces reflecting a mixture of emotions I couldn't immediately interpret. David stepped forward first, his expression showing genuine concern, and what appeared to be admiration. "Rachel, I saw what happened in there. What you did was incredible." I had no idea. His voice carried a tone of wonder that I hadn't heard from him in years, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time since our marriage began. Robert stood slightly behind his son, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished as he observed the aftermath of the medical emergency. His expensive suit looked out of place in the hospital corridor, and his typically confident demeanor seemed shaken by what he had witnessed. For the first time since I had known him, Robert Hartwell appeared uncertain, his carefully constructed worldview challenged by the reality of what had just unfolded before his eyes. Dr. Thompson joined our small group, still riding the adrenaline high that follows a successful emergency intervention. "Your wife is one of our most valuable team members," he told David with obvious pride. "Her clinical skills and ability to perform under pressure are exceptional. We're lucky to have her in our pediatric intensive care unit." His words hung in the hospital corridor like a revelation, offering a perspective on my professional worth that contrasted sharply with the dismissive comments I had overheard the previous day. I watched Robert's face carefully as Dr. Thompson continued to praise my performance during the cardiac emergency, noting the subtle changes in his expression as he processed this new information about my capabilities and importance to the medical team. The man who had dismissed my career as a meaningless hobby was being forced to confront evidence of my professional expertise and the life-saving value of my work. David's reaction was even more pronounced, his eyes wide, with what appeared to be genuine amazement at witnessing my professional competence firsthand. I realized that despite being married for 5 years, he had never actually seen me work in my element, never observed the skills and knowledge that I brought to my job every single day. His surprise at my capabilities was almost as hurtful as his father's dismissiveness, suggesting that he had somehow failed to recognize or appreciate the complexity and importance of my chosen career. Nicole excused herself to check on other patients, but not before giving David and Robert a pointed look that suggested she had overheard enough of their conversation to form her own opinions about their attitudes toward my profession. Her protective loyalty meant everything to me in that moment, reminding me that I had colleagues who valued and respected my contributions to our shared mission of healing sick children. Lee and Wei Chen emerged from Emma's room, their faces still showing the emotional aftermath of nearly losing their daughter but now brightened with hope and gratitude. They approached our group with the kind of reverence typically reserved for religious figures, their appreciation for our medical team's efforts, evident in every gesture and expression. Mrs. Chen reached for my hands again, her voice thick with emotion as she struggled to express her gratitude in her accented English. "You saved our Emma," she said simply, her words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "We will never forget what you did for our family today." Her husband nodded emphatically, adding his own heartfelt thanks while explaining that Emma was their only child, born after years of fertility struggles and representing their entire world. The idea that they had nearly lost her was almost unbearable, but knowing that skilled medical professionals had fought to save her life gave them renewed faith in the power of modern medicine and human compassion. Robert listened to their emotional expressions of gratitude with growing discomfort, his face reflecting the internal struggle of a man whose fundamental beliefs were being challenged by undeniable evidence. The parents weren't thanking some abstract medical system or impersonal hospital bureaucracy. They were specifically thanking me, the woman he had dismissed as worthless and expendable, for using my skills and knowledge to save their child's life. David's transformation was even more dramatic as he absorbed the full implications of what he had witnessed. His wife, the woman his father considered a burden and an embarrassment, had just participated in saving a child's life, using expertise and abilities he had never bothered to understand or appreciate. The cognitive dissonance was written clearly across his features as he struggled to reconcile his father's dismissive attitude with the evidence of my professional competence and importance. Dr. Thompson invited David and Robert to join him in his office, suggesting that they might benefit from understanding more about the work we did in the pediatric intensive care unit and the level of training and expertise required to handle medical emergencies like the one they had just witnessed. His offer was clearly intended to educate them about the reality of modern nursing practice, particularly in specialized fields like pediatric critical care. As we walked toward Dr. Thompson's office, I found myself curious about what had brought David and Robert to the hospital in the first place. Their presence during Emma's cardiac emergency seemed too coincidental to be accidental, but I couldn't imagine what business they might have had at Riverside General Hospital on a Tuesday morning. David's earlier words about not knowing what I was capable of suggested that their visit had opened his eyes to aspects of my professional life that he had previously ignored or misunderstood. Dr. Thompson's office was filled with medical journals, patient files, and the various awards and certifications that reflected his distinguished career in pediatric medicine. He gestured for David and Robert to take seats while he pulled out several thick binders containing information about our department's training requirements, patient outcomes, and quality metrics. His intention was clearly to provide them with concrete evidence of the complexity and importance of the work performed by our nursing staff. Rachel represents the gold standard of pediatric intensive care nursing, Dr. Thompson began, opening one of the binders to reveal detailed documentation of my professional accomplishments and continuing education records. She has completed advanced certifications in pediatric cardiac care, neonatal resuscitation, and critical care pharmacology. Her knowledge base rivals that of many residents, and her clinical judgment is impeccable. He continued explaining the rigorous requirements for working in the PICU, detailing the years of specialized training, the constant continuing education demands, and the emotional resilience required to handle life and death situations on a daily basis. Robert listened with growing surprise, clearly learning for the first time about the complexity and sophistication of modern nursing practice in specialized medical fields. David's questions revealed his genuine ignorance about my professional world, despite 5 years of marriage and countless conversations about my work. He had somehow managed to remain completely unaware of the advanced training I had completed, the additional certifications I maintained, and the level of responsibility I carried as a senior member of the PICU nursing staff. His surprise at learning about my professional accomplishments was both enlightening and deeply hurtful. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock on Dr. Thompson's office door. Nicole appeared, her expression serious, as she delivered news that would change everything about how David and Robert viewed my professional capabilities. "Rachel, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing with the Morrison baby in the NICU. Dr. Patterson is requesting your immediate assistance with a complex cardiac procedure. Your expertise with pediatric cardiac monitoring is specifically needed." The Morrison case was particularly challenging, involving a premature infant born with multiple cardiac defects who required the most sophisticated monitoring and care available. Dr. Patterson, the chief of neonatal surgery, had specifically requested my involvement because of my advanced training in pediatric cardiac care and my reputation for maintaining stability in high-stress situations. The fact that a senior physician was specifically calling for my expertise was a powerful demonstration of my professional value and reputation within the hospital. David and Robert exchanged glances that reflected their growing understanding of my professional status and importance to the medical team. The dismissive comments about nursing being something any high school graduate could do were being systematically demolished by the evidence of my specialized knowledge and the trust placed in me by senior physicians and department heads. Dr. Thompson stood up, clearly preparing to accompany me to the NICU for what promised to be another critical intervention. "Gentlemen, you're welcome to observe from the family viewing area if you'd like to see more of what Rachel does in her daily work. I think you might find it educational." His invitation was delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that barely concealed his disapproval of their previous attitudes toward my career. As we prepared to leave his office, Dr. Thompson added one final comment that would resonate with David and Robert long after the day's events had concluded. "Rachel is exactly the kind of nurse that makes this hospital's reputation for excellence possible. Her combination of technical expertise, clinical judgment, and emotional intelligence is rare and valuable. We consider ourselves fortunate to have her on our team." Walking toward the NICU, I found myself accompanied by an unexpected entourage, as David and Robert decided to accept Dr. Thompson's invitation to observe the upcoming procedure. Their presence felt surreal, given that they had spent years dismissing my career as inconsequential, but I was too focused on the medical challenge ahead to give their sudden interest much consideration. The Morrison baby's condition required the kind of precise monitoring and intervention that represented the pinnacle of pediatric cardiac care. As I entered the NICU and began preparing for what Dr. Patterson had described as a delicate and complex procedure, I felt the familiar surge of professional confidence that came from knowing I was exactly where I belonged, doing work that mattered more than any social function or charity luncheon could ever matter. Through the viewing window, I could see David and Robert watching intently as I demonstrated the expertise and competence that had made me a valued member of Riverside General Hospital's medical team. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely proud of who I was and what I could accomplish, regardless of what anyone else thought about my worth or my choices. The Morrison baby lay motionless in the specialized incubator, surrounded by an intricate web of monitoring equipment that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every vital function that kept the tiny infant alive. Born 3 weeks premature with a complex congenital heart defect known as hypoplastic left heart syndrome, baby Morrison represented one of the most challenging cases our neonatal intensive care unit had encountered in months. The surgical repair Dr. Patterson planned to perform would require absolute precision in monitoring the infant's cardiac function throughout the delicate procedure. As I approached the incubator, my hands automatically began the careful process of checking and calibrating the sophisticated monitoring equipment that would be crucial for tracking the baby's condition during surgery. Each machine served a specific purpose in maintaining the delicate balance required to keep such a fragile patient stable, and my years of specialized training had taught me to read the subtle signs and signals that could mean the difference between life and death. Dr. Patterson emerged from the surgical preparation area, his face reflecting the intense concentration that preceded any high-risk pediatric cardiac procedure. "Rachel, I need you to maintain continuous monitoring of the left ventricular pressure while we attempt to repair the mitral valve. Your experience with pediatric cardiac cases makes you the only nurse I trust to catch any irregularities before they become dangerous." His confidence in my abilities was absolute, born from years of working together on the most complex cases that arrived at our hospital. Through the viewing window that separated the NICU from the family observation area, I could see David and Robert watching with fascination as I began setting up the monitoring protocols that would guide Dr. Patterson through the upcoming surgery. Their expressions had transformed completely from the dismissive attitudes they had displayed just hours earlier, replaced by something resembling awe as they observed the complexity and sophistication of the medical procedures taking place before their eyes. The baby's parents, Maria and Carlos Morrison, stood beside my husband and father-in-law, their faces etched with the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of uncertainty about their child's survival. They had been living at the hospital since their son's birth, maintaining a constant vigil, while Dr. Patterson and his team worked to stabilize the infant's condition enough to attempt the corrective surgery that represented his only chance for a normal life. As I began the meticulous process of establishing baseline measurements for all of the baby's vital functions, Dr. Patterson explained to his surgical team the critical nature of the upcoming procedure and the importance of maintaining constant communication throughout the operation. The slightest deviation in the infant's cardiac rhythm could signal complications that would require immediate intervention, making the monitoring nurse's role absolutely crucial to the surgery's success. Nicole appeared at my side, having been assigned to assist with the procedure despite her primary responsibilities in the pediatric intensive care unit. Her presence provided an additional layer of security and expertise that Dr. Patterson valued highly, particularly given the complexity of the Morrison case and the potential for unexpected complications during such delicate cardiac surgery on such a young patient. The surgical team moved with practiced efficiency as they prepared the operating area within the NICU, transforming the space into a sterile environment suitable for the intricate procedure ahead. Every movement was choreographed with precision, reflecting years of experience in handling the most challenging pediatric cardiac cases that required immediate intervention to save young lives. My role during the surgery would be to maintain continuous observation of the infant's cardiac function, while simultaneously managing the complex array of monitoring equipment that tracked everything from blood oxygen levels to intracranial pressure. The responsibility was enormous, requiring absolute focus and the ability to interpret subtle changes in the data that might indicate developing complications before they became life-threatening. As Dr. Patterson began the initial phase of the surgery, I found myself entering the zone of intense concentration that characterized my work during the most critical medical procedures. Every sound from the monitoring equipment demanded my attention. Every fluctuation in the displays required immediate analysis and interpretation. The baby's life depended on my ability to detect problems before they became irreversible. Through my peripheral vision, I remained aware of David and Robert's continued observation from the viewing area, but their presence faded into background irrelevance as the demands of the surgical procedure consumed my complete attention. This was what I lived for, the moments when my training and expertise were put to their ultimate test in service of saving a human life. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes into the procedure, when the infant's left ventricular pressure began showing irregular patterns that suggested potential complications with the valve repair Dr. Patterson was attempting. My years of experience with pediatric cardiac monitoring allowed me to recognize the significance of these changes before the automated alarms could alert the surgical team to the developing problem. "Dr. Patterson, I'm seeing irregular pressure patterns in the left ventricle," I announced calmly, my voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the operating area. "The readings suggest possible interference with blood flow through the repair site." My ability to interpret these subtle changes and communicate them clearly to the surgical team was exactly why Dr. Patterson had specifically requested my involvement in this complex procedure. Without missing a beat, Dr. Patterson adjusted his surgical approach based on my observations, making microscopic modifications to the valve repair that addressed the blood flow issues I had detected. His trust in my monitoring expertise was absolute, built through years of successful collaboration on the most challenging pediatric cardiac cases. The seamless communication between surgeon and monitoring nurse represented the pinnacle of medical teamwork. The correction was successful, with the infant's cardiac pressures returning to normal ranges within minutes of Dr. Patterson's adjustment to the surgical technique. But the close call reminded everyone in the operating area of how quickly complications could develop and how crucial it was to have experienced personnel monitoring every aspect of the baby's condition throughout the procedure. Nicole caught my eye and nodded with approval, her expression reflecting the respect and admiration that characterized our professional relationship. She understood better than anyone the skill and knowledge required to detect the subtle changes I had identified, and her recognition of my expertise provided reassurance that my interpretation of the monitoring data had been accurate and valuable. As the surgery continued, I found myself managing increasingly complex monitoring requirements as Dr. Patterson moved deeper into the cardiac repair process. Each phase of the procedure required different monitoring protocols, and my ability to anticipate these needs and adjust the equipment accordingly allowed the surgical team to maintain their focus on the delicate work of repairing the infant's heart defects. From the viewing area, I could see Maria Morrison gripping her husband's hand tightly as they watched the surgical team work to save their son's life. Their emotional investment in the outcome was palpable, and I drew additional motivation from their presence, knowing that my performance during this surgery would directly impact their family's future happiness and their child's quality of life. The most critical moment of the surgery arrived when Dr. Patterson attempted to reconnect the repaired valve to the infant's circulatory system, a procedure that required absolute precision in timing and technique. My monitoring equipment would provide the crucial feedback needed to ensure that the repair was functioning properly, and that blood flow through the heart was returning to normal patterns. As Dr. Patterson completed the valve connection, I watched the monitoring displays intently for signs that the repair was successful and that the infant's heart was accepting the surgical modifications. The next few minutes would determine whether the complex procedure had achieved its intended goals or whether additional interventions would be necessary to save the baby's life. The moment when the infant's cardiac rhythm stabilized and the monitoring equipment confirmed successful blood flow through the repaired valve was one of pure professional triumph. Dr. Patterson stepped back from the operating table with obvious satisfaction, his expertise having successfully corrected defects that would have been fatal without surgical intervention. The baby's vital signs showed strong improvement, indicating that the procedure had achieved its primary objectives. But our work was far from finished, as the post-surgical monitoring phase would be equally crucial to ensuring the infant's continued stability and recovery. My role would continue for several hours, as we carefully observed the baby's response to the surgical repair and watched for any signs of complications that might require additional medical intervention. Nicole began the process of documenting the surgical procedure and updating the infant's medical records with the detailed information that would guide his continued care in the days and weeks ahead. Her meticulous attention to detail ensured that every aspect of the surgery and the baby's response would be available to guide future treatment decisions and monitor his progress toward full recovery. Dr. Patterson removed his surgical mask and approached the monitoring station where I continued to track the infant's vital signs, his expression showing the satisfaction that comes from successfully completing a complex and challenging procedure. "Rachel, your monitoring during that surgery was flawless. Your early detection of the pressure irregularities allowed us to make the necessary adjustments before they became problematic. This baby's successful outcome is directly attributable to your expertise and vigilance." His praise was particularly meaningful, given Dr. Patterson's reputation as one of the most demanding and exacting surgeons in the hospital, someone who expected nothing less than perfection from every member of his surgical team. The fact that he took time to specifically acknowledge my contribution to the successful outcome spoke volumes about the value he placed on my professional skills and knowledge. As we began the process of transitioning the infant to post-surgical recovery protocols, I became aware that David and Robert were requesting permission to enter the NICU area to speak with Dr. Patterson about what they had observed during the surgery. Their interest in learning more about the procedure and my role in its success represented a dramatic shift from their previous dismissive attitudes toward my profession. Dr. Patterson welcomed them into the NICU, taking time to explain the complexity of the surgical procedure they had witnessed and the crucial importance of specialized nursing expertise in achieving successful outcomes in pediatric cardiac cases. His explanation was thorough and educational, designed to help them understand the level of training and skill required to work effectively in such a demanding medical environment. "Your wife's performance during that surgery represents the highest level of professional nursing practice," Dr. Patterson told David with obvious sincerity. "Her ability to interpret complex monitoring data and communicate critical information during high-stress situations is exceptional. We're fortunate to have someone with her expertise and experience on our team." His words carried the weight of absolute authority, coming from someone whose opinion was respected throughout the medical community. Robert listened to Dr. Patterson's explanation with growing amazement, clearly learning for the first time about the sophisticated knowledge base and technical skills required for my work in the neonatal intensive care unit. His questions revealed genuine curiosity about the training and education necessary to function effectively in such a specialized medical field, representing a complete departure from his previous dismissive attitude. The transformation in David's understanding was even more dramatic, as he absorbed the full implications of what he had witnessed during the morning's medical emergencies. His wife, the woman his father had described as worthless and expendable, had just played a crucial role in saving 2 children's lives, using expertise and abilities that he had never bothered to understand or appreciate during their 5 years of marriage. As Dr. Patterson continued his detailed explanation of pediatric cardiac nursing and the specialized training required for NICU work, I found myself feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The professional recognition and respect I received from my medical colleagues stood in stark contrast to the dismissive treatment I had endured from my husband's family, highlighting the disconnect between my professional worth and my value as a family member. Maria Morrison approached our group with tears of gratitude streaming down her face, her emotional relief at her son's successful surgery evident in every gesture and expression. She reached for my hands, her voice breaking with emotion as she attempted to express her appreciation for the role I had played in saving her child's life. "You watched over our baby like he was your own," she said simply. "We will never forget what you did for our family today." Her heartfelt gratitude provided a powerful counterpoint to Robert's previous assessment of my worth and value, demonstrating the real-world impact of my professional expertise on the lives of families facing their worst nightmares. The Morrison family would go home with their son because of the successful surgery, and they understood clearly that my monitoring and expertise had been crucial to that positive outcome. Carlos Morrison joined his wife in expressing their gratitude, explaining that their son represented their entire world and that the successful surgery had given them hope for his future, that they had feared was lost forever. Their emotional appreciation for the medical team's efforts was deeply moving, reminding everyone present of the profound human impact of the work performed daily in the hospital's specialized units. Dr. Patterson invited David and Robert to observe the post-surgical monitoring phase, explaining that the next several hours would be equally critical in ensuring the infant's continued stability and successful recovery. Their acceptance of his invitation suggested a genuine desire to understand more about the complexity and importance of the medical work they had witnessed throughout the day. As I settled in for what would be several hours of intensive post-surgical monitoring, I found myself reflecting on the dramatic events of the morning and their potential impact on my relationship with David and his family. The professional competence and expertise I had demonstrated during the medical emergencies provided undeniable evidence of my value and worth, challenging the dismissive attitudes that had dominated my interactions with the Hartwell family. Nicole returned to check on the Morrison baby's progress, her expression showing satisfaction with his stable condition and strong response to the surgical repair. She paused beside my monitoring station, her voice low as she made an observation that had occurred to her during the day's events. "Your husband and his father seem surprised by what you can do," she said quietly. "Have they never seen you work before?" Her question highlighted one of the most troubling aspects of my marriage and family relationships: the fact that David had somehow remained completely ignorant about my professional capabilities despite 5 years of marriage and countless conversations about my work. His surprise at witnessing my expertise suggested a fundamental disconnect between his perception of my career and the reality of my daily responsibilities and accomplishments. The afternoon passed peacefully as the Morrison baby continued to show strong recovery from his surgery, his vital signs remaining stable and his overall condition improving steadily. My monitoring revealed no complications or concerning developments, suggesting that Dr. Patterson's surgical repair had been completely successful, and that the infant was well on his way to a full recovery. David and Robert remained in the NICU throughout the afternoon, observing the post-surgical care process and asking increasingly sophisticated questions about pediatric cardiac medicine and the role of specialized nursing in achieving positive patient outcomes. Their genuine interest in learning about my professional world represented a complete reversal from their previous dismissive attitudes. As evening approached and the Morrison baby's condition remained stable, Dr. Patterson declared the surgery a complete success and began the process of transitioning the infant to the regular recovery protocols that would guide his continued care. The crisis had passed, and the baby's prospects for a normal and healthy life had been dramatically improved through the successful surgical intervention. The day's events had provided David and Robert with an education in the reality of modern medical practice and the crucial importance of specialized nursing expertise in achieving positive patient outcomes. Their observations of my professional performance had challenged their preconceptions and forced them to confront the disconnect between their dismissive attitudes and the evidence of my competence and value. Walking out of the NICU at the end of my shift, I felt a profound sense of professional satisfaction and personal vindication. The expertise and skills that Robert had dismissed as worthless had proven crucial in saving 2 children's lives, demonstrating beyond any doubt the value and importance of my chosen career. Whatever happened next in my personal relationships, I knew with absolute certainty that my work mattered and that my contributions to the world had genuine and lasting significance. The silence in our car during the drive home was deafening, filled with unspoken realizations and uncomfortable truths that neither David nor Robert seemed prepared to address directly. I focused on the familiar Portland streets passing by my window, using the routine of the evening commute to process the emotional whirlwind of the day's events. The professional validation I had experienced at the hospital felt surreal when contrasted with the years of dismissive treatment I had endured from the Hartwell family. David's hands gripped the steering wheel with unusual tension, his knuckles white as he navigated through the downtown traffic. Every few minutes I caught him glancing at me through the rearview mirror, his expression reflecting a mixture of amazement, confusion, and what appeared to be genuine remorse. The man who had married me 5 years earlier was slowly coming to terms with the reality that he had never truly understood or appreciated the woman he had promised to love and honor. Robert sat in the passenger seat, uncharacteristically quiet, for someone who typically dominated every conversation with his opinions and observations about the world around him. His expensive suit looked somehow diminished after spending the day in a hospital environment where designer clothing meant nothing compared to medical expertise and life-saving skills. The confident legal authority who had dismissed my career as meaningless was struggling to reconcile his prejudices with the undeniable evidence of my professional competence. When we finally arrived at our house in the quiet neighborhood of Laurelhurst, David made no move to get out of the car immediately. Instead, he turned in his seat to face me directly, his expression more serious than I had seen in years. "Rachel, I need to talk to you about today. About what I saw at the hospital. About things I should have understood long ago but somehow missed completely." His voice carried a weight of realization that suggested he was beginning to grasp the magnitude of his oversight. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions as I looked at my husband's face, seeing genuine recognition there for perhaps the first time since our wedding day. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated by his newfound appreciation, but a larger part felt deeply saddened that it had taken such dramatic circumstances for him to see what should have been obvious throughout our marriage. The professional competence he had witnessed that day wasn't new or unusual for me. It was simply the reality of who I had always been. Inside our house, Robert immediately excused himself to make several phone calls, claiming urgent business matters that required his immediate attention, but I suspected he needed time to process what he had experienced and to figure out how to reconcile his long-held beliefs about my worthlessness with the evidence of my professional expertise and the respect I commanded from senior physicians and medical colleagues. David poured himself a scotch, something he rarely did except during times of significant stress or uncertainty. He stood by our living room window, staring out at the garden we had planted together during our first year of marriage, when our future had seemed bright and uncomplicated. The man who had once listened with fascination to my stories about pediatric nursing now appeared to be seeing me clearly for the first time in years. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly and carefully, as if he was struggling to find language adequate to express thoughts and feelings he had never examined before. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. Not just for today, but for years of not seeing what was right in front of me. I watched you save 2 children's lives today, and I realized that I've been living with someone whose work I've never truly understood or valued the way I should have." His admission felt both validating and heartbreaking, confirmation that my suspicions about his changing attitude toward my career had been accurate. The enthusiastic support he had shown during our courtship had gradually eroded under his father's influence, replaced by polite disinterest and subtle dismissiveness that had damaged my self-confidence and sense of worth within our marriage. I sat down on our sofa, feeling suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day's revelations and their implications for our future together. "David, I've been trying to tell you about my work for years. Every time I shared stories about particularly challenging cases or exciting developments in pediatric medicine, you seemed distracted or uninterested. I started to believe that maybe my career really wasn't as important as I thought it was." His face crumpled with what appeared to be genuine regret as he absorbed the impact of his behavior on my self-perception and professional confidence. "I never meant to make you feel that way," he said quietly. "I think I got caught up in Dad's expectations and lost sight of who you really are and what you accomplish every day. Watching you work today, seeing the respect you command from doctors and colleagues, realizing that you literally save lives as part of your daily routine, it's changed everything for me." Robert's voice carried from the den where he was conducting his phone calls, and while I couldn't make out the specific words, his tone suggested conversations of unusual intensity and importance. I wondered if he was discussing the day's events with business associates or perhaps seeking advice about how to handle the dramatic shift in his understanding of my professional capabilities and worth. David moved closer to where I sat, his expression showing vulnerability that I hadn't seen since the early days of our relationship. He reached for my hands, and for the first time in months, his touch felt genuine rather than obligatory. "Rachel, I need you to know that I'm proud of you. I should have been saying that all along, but I got lost in Dad's vision of what our marriage should look like and forgot to appreciate what it actually was." His words should have felt like the validation I had been seeking for years, but instead they highlighted the depth of the disconnect that had developed between us. The fact that it had required such dramatic circumstances for him to recognize my worth suggested fundamental problems in our relationship that went beyond simple misunderstanding or poor communication. Before I could respond to David's declaration, Robert appeared in the doorway of our living room, his expression showing the kind of internal struggle that comes from having one's basic assumptions challenged by undeniable evidence. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the day's events had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own prejudices and blind spots. "Rachel," he began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "I owe you an explanation about why David and I were at the hospital today." His admission suggested that their presence during the medical emergencies had not been coincidental, though I couldn't imagine what might have brought them to Riverside General on a Tuesday morning. Robert sat down heavily in the armchair across from our sofa, his posture reflecting the weight of whatever revelation he was preparing to share. "We received a call from the hospital administration this morning about a potential malpractice situation involving one of our firm's clients. I thought it would be a routine consultation, something we could handle quickly and efficiently without much involvement from the medical staff." His explanation began to clarify the circumstances that had led to their unexpected appearance at the hospital, but it also raised questions about why they had remained to observe the medical emergencies, rather than conducting their legal business and leaving as originally planned. When we arrived at the hospital, the administrator mentioned that the nurse they most wanted us to interview about the case was someone named Rachel Hartwell. Robert paused, his expression showing embarrassment at the memory. I told them there must be some mistake, that my daughter-in-law was just a regular nurse who couldn't possibly have the expertise they were describing. I suggested they must have confused you with someone else. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, confirming my worst suspicions about how Robert perceived my professional capabilities and reputation. Even when the hospital administration specifically requested my involvement in a legal matter based on my expertise and knowledge, he had dismissed their assessment as impossible, so convinced was he of my incompetence and irrelevance. David's face showed shock and anger as he absorbed his father's admission, clearly understanding the insulting implications of Robert's assumption that the hospital must have been mistaken about my professional qualifications. The same man who claimed to love and respect family members had been so blinded by his prejudices that he couldn't imagine his daughter-in-law possessing the expertise that medical professionals valued. "The administrator insisted that you were exactly the person they needed to consult with," Robert continued, his voice growing quieter as he recounted the conversation. "She described your reputation within the hospital, your specialized training, your role in several high-profile cases that had attracted attention from the medical community. I found myself arguing with her, insisting that she had the wrong person." I sat in stunned silence, processing the full implications of Robert's revelation and understanding for the first time the depth of his contempt for my professional abilities. Even when presented with external validation of my expertise from medical professionals who had no reason to exaggerate my qualifications, he had been so committed to his dismissive assessment that he had argued against their evaluation. "That's when we heard the emergency alarms," Robert said, his voice now carrying obvious regret. "The administrator suggested we wait in the family area while she located you for our consultation. We never intended to observe your work, but when the medical emergencies began, we found ourselves witnessing something I never expected to see." David's anger was becoming more apparent as he listened to his father's account of their morning at the hospital. "Dad, you argued with hospital administrators about Rachel's qualifications. You were so convinced she was incompetent that you couldn't accept their professional assessment of her expertise?" His voice carried a mixture of outrage and disappointment that suggested a fundamental shift in his relationship with his father. Robert's discomfort was palpable as he faced the consequences of his prejudices and the impact they had had on family relationships. "I realize now that my assumptions were completely wrong," he said quietly. "Watching you work today, seeing the respect you command from senior physicians, witnessing your expertise in life-threatening situations, I understand that I've been unfair and dismissive in ways that were inexcusable." His admission felt like too little, too late, particularly given the years of subtle and not-so-subtle dismissal I had endured at family gatherings and social functions. The damage to my self-confidence and my relationship with David couldn't be undone by a single acknowledgement of error, no matter how sincere it might be. "The legal consultation you were supposed to provide," David asked his father, "what was that about?" His question suggested genuine curiosity about the circumstances that had brought them to the hospital, and provided the opportunity for Robert to witness my professional competence firsthand. Robert's explanation revealed that the hospital was facing a potential lawsuit related to a pediatric cardiac case, and they wanted my expert testimony about standard care protocols and nursing responsibilities in complex medical situations. My reputation for expertise in pediatric cardiac care had made me their first choice for providing professional insight that could help defend against the malpractice claim. The irony was not lost on any of us that Robert had been dismissive of my qualifications for providing exactly the kind of expert consultation that his law firm regularly sought from medical professionals in similar cases. His inability to recognize my expertise had led him to argue against my suitability for a role that other legal professionals clearly considered me uniquely qualified to fulfill. Rachel, the administrator specifically mentioned your involvement in developing new protocols for pediatric cardiac monitoring, Robert continued. She said your innovations had been adopted by other hospitals throughout the region, and that your expertise was sought after by medical institutions across the Pacific Northwest. I had no idea that your professional reputation extended so far beyond this hospital. His revelation about my professional recognition outside of Riverside General was news to David as well, highlighting once again how little attention he had paid to my career accomplishments and professional development over the years of our marriage. The man who claimed to love and support me had somehow remained completely ignorant about achievements that were well known within my professional community. The weight of these revelations settled over our living room like a heavy blanket, forcing all three of us to confront uncomfortable truths about assumptions, prejudices, and the damage that dismissive attitudes can inflict on family relationships. The professional competence I had demonstrated at the hospital couldn't be dismissed or explained away, forcing Robert and David to acknowledge that their perceptions of my worth had been fundamentally flawed. David stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he processed the full implications of what he had learned about his father's attitudes and his own failure to recognize my professional achievements. Dad, I need to understand something. When you told me Rachel wasn't worth throwing my future away for, were you really so ignorant about who she is and what she does that you believed your own assessment over the opinions of medical professionals who work with her every day? The confrontation I had been dreading and hoping for was finally happening, but not in the way I had ever imagined. David's anger was directed primarily at his father rather than at the situation in general, suggesting that he was beginning to understand how Robert's influence had poisoned his perception of our marriage and my value as a partner. Robert's attempts to defend his previous statements only served to highlight the depth of his prejudices and the extent to which his social snobbery had blinded him to reality. I was concerned about David's career prospects, he said weakly. I thought Rachel's background and profession might limit his opportunities for advancement in certain social and professional circles. The admission that Robert had viewed my background as a liability rather than an asset revealed the true nature of his objections to our marriage. It wasn't about my character, my intelligence, or my dedication to David. It was about social class, professional prestige, and his concern that associating with someone from my background might somehow diminish the Hartwell family's standing in Portland society. David's response was immediate and devastating. Dad, Rachel saves children's lives for a living. She's respected by physicians, valued by hospital administrators, and sought after for her expertise by legal professionals. How could anyone view that as anything other than admirable and worthwhile? What kind of social circles would consider that a liability? The question hung in the air between father and son, highlighting the fundamental difference in their values and their understanding of what constituted genuine worth and contribution to society. David was finally seeing his father's attitudes for what they really were, and the realization was clearly painful and disillusioning. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted from confrontation to a more thoughtful exploration of how misconceptions and prejudices had shaped family dynamics for years. Robert's willingness to acknowledge his errors seemed genuine, but the damage to relationships and self-perceptions couldn't be repaired through simple apologies or admissions of fault. The transformation in David's attitude toward me and my career was dramatic and immediate, but it also raised questions about the foundation of our marriage and whether love and respect that required such dramatic circumstances to emerge could be sustained over time. The man who was now expressing pride in my professional accomplishments was the same person who had been subtly dismissive of my career for years. I found myself wondering whether this newfound appreciation would survive the return to normal daily routines, or whether the influence of social expectations and family pressures would gradually erode David's recognition of my worth, just as they had done in the past. The vindication I felt was tempered by uncertainty about whether these revelations would lead to lasting change or simply temporary acknowledgement. The evening ended with tentative attempts at reconciliation and promises of changed attitudes and behaviors, but the underlying issues that had created our problems remained largely unaddressed. Professional competence and life-saving skills were undeniably impressive, but they didn't automatically resolve the fundamental questions about respect, support, and mutual understanding that form the foundation of any successful marriage. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the strange turn of events that had forced my husband and father-in-law to confront their own prejudices and misconceptions. The validation I had received from witnessing their shocked recognition of my professional capabilities felt satisfying, but it also highlighted how little they had truly known or valued about the person I had always been. 6 months later, I stood in the gleaming conference room of Cedar Point Medical Center, reviewing the presentation materials that would formally establish the new pediatric cardiac unit I had been recruited to lead. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the architectural plans and medical equipment specifications spread across the polished mahogany table. Everything about this moment felt like a dream I had never dared to imagine becoming reality. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Cedar Point's chief medical officer, entered the room with the kind of confident energy that characterized successful healthcare executives. Her recruitment offer had arrived just 3 weeks after the hospital events that had changed everything about my family dynamics, presenting an opportunity that seemed almost too perfect to be genuine. The position as Director of Pediatric Cardiac Services represented everything I had ever hoped to achieve professionally, but had never believed would be possible given the constraints of my personal life. "Rachel, I've just reviewed the final budget approvals for your department," Dr. Warren announced with obvious satisfaction. "The board has authorized everything you requested for the specialized monitoring equipment, the additional nursing positions, and the expanded training programs. They're as excited as I am about bringing your expertise and vision to Cedar Point." Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminding me of why I had fallen in love with pediatric medicine in the first place. The transition from staff nurse at Riverside General to department director at one of Portland's most prestigious medical centers had been remarkably smooth, facilitated by Dr. Warren's determination to recruit someone with my specific combination of clinical experience and innovative thinking. The reputation I had built over years of dedicated service had opened doors I hadn't even known existed, proving that professional excellence eventually creates its own opportunities. My new office overlooked the hospital's healing garden, where families often sought solace during difficult times with their children. The space was 3 times larger than anything I had ever imagined having, equipped with state-of-the-art technology for reviewing patient cases and conducting virtual consultations with medical centers throughout the country. The nameplate on my door read, "Dr. Rachel Hartwell, Director of Pediatric Cardiac Services," reflecting the doctoral degree in nursing practice I had completed through night and weekend classes during my years at Riverside General. The irony of my new title was not lost on me, particularly given Robert's previous insistence that nursing was something any high school graduate could pursue. The doctoral program had required the same rigorous academic standards as medical school, including comprehensive examinations, clinical rotations, and a research dissertation that had been published in the Journal of Pediatric Cardiac Nursing. But my family had never bothered to learn about these achievements, too convinced of my limitations to investigate the reality of my professional development. David's transformation since the hospital incident had been dramatic and sustained, exceeding even my most optimistic expectations for changes in his attitude and behavior. He had taken genuine interest in learning about my new position, asking thoughtful questions about my responsibilities and expressing pride in my professional accomplishments. The man who had once seemed distracted when I discussed my work now actively sought information about my projects and celebrated my successes with enthusiasm that felt authentic rather than obligatory. More significantly, David had begun setting boundaries with his father regarding comments about our marriage and my career, making it clear that dismissive attitudes toward my profession would no longer be tolerated or ignored. The change in their relationship dynamics had been profound, With Robert learning to express genuine respect for my expertise rather than the patronizing tolerance that had characterized his previous interactions with me. The most meaningful transformation had occurred in David's willingness to prioritize our relationship over his father's approval and expectations. When Robert had suggested that my new position at Cedar Point might interfere with important social obligations, David had firmly responded that my professional success would always take precedence over dinner parties and charity functions that served no purpose beyond maintaining social appearances. My first major challenge as department director had involved developing treatment protocols for the most complex pediatric cardiac cases, working with a team of specialists to create comprehensive care plans that addressed not only medical needs but also the emotional and psychological aspects of treating critically ill children. The project required exactly the kind of innovative thinking and collaborative leadership that I had been developing throughout my nursing career, but had never been given the opportunity to demonstrate in a formal leadership role. The success of our new protocols had attracted attention from pediatric cardiac centers throughout the Pacific Northwest, leading to invitations for speaking engagements and consultation requests that established my reputation as a thought leader in the field. The professional recognition felt surreal after years of having my expertise dismissed and undervalued, but it also provided validation that my contributions to pediatric medicine had genuine merit and importance. Nicole had joined my team at Cedar Point as Assistant Director of Nursing for the Cardiac Unit, bringing her own expertise and our established working relationship to the new department. Her decision to leave Riverside General had been influenced partly by the opportunity to work together in expanded roles, but also by her belief in the vision we shared for advancing pediatric cardiac care through innovative nursing practices and interdisciplinary collaboration. The grand opening ceremony for our new pediatric cardiac unit was scheduled for the following week, with planned attendance from medical professionals, hospital administrators, and community leaders who had supported the project's development. David had requested time off from his law practice to attend the ceremony, telling his partners that supporting his wife's professional achievements was more important than any client meeting or court appearance they might schedule. Robert's evolution had been slower and more complicated than David's, requiring ongoing effort to overcome decades of entrenched prejudices and social conditioning. But his attendance at my doctoral graduation ceremony had represented a significant milestone in our relationship, particularly when he had approached me afterward to express genuine pride in my academic achievement and professional advancement. The legal consultation that had originally brought Robert and David to Riverside General had concluded successfully, with my expert testimony playing a crucial role in defending the hospital against the malpractice claim. Robert's law firm had been so impressed with my professional knowledge and courtroom presentation that they had added me to their roster of expert witnesses for future medical cases, creating an additional source of income and professional recognition. The most profound change in our family dynamics had been the shift from viewing my career as an obligation to be tolerated to recognizing it as an achievement to be celebrated and supported. Family dinners now included genuine conversations about my work, with Robert asking informed questions about medical developments and treatment innovations, rather than steering discussions toward topics that excluded my professional expertise. Dr. Warren had become not just a supervisor but a mentor and advocate, helping me navigate the complex administrative and political aspects of hospital leadership, while encouraging my involvement in professional organizations and medical research initiatives. Her support had been instrumental in my successful transition from clinical nursing to healthcare administration, providing guidance and encouragement that had been completely absent from my personal relationships until recently. The financial independence that came with my new position had transformed the power dynamics within my marriage, eliminating the economic dependence that had made it difficult to challenge dismissive attitudes or demand respectful treatment. My salary as department director exceeded David's income as a junior partner, creating a new reality that required both of us to adjust our assumptions about financial roles and family decision-making authority. 3 weeks before the unit's grand opening, an unexpected crisis tested both my professional capabilities and the genuineness of my family's changed attitudes. A multi-vehicle accident had brought several critically injured children to our emergency department, creating exactly the kind of complex medical situation that our new cardiac unit had been designed to handle. The most severely injured patient was a 7-year-old boy named Marcus, whose chest trauma had caused life-threatening damage to his heart and required immediate surgical intervention. The case was complicated by the child's rare blood type and the need for specialized equipment that was available only through our new cardiac unit's advanced monitoring systems. I found myself coordinating not only the medical response to Marcus's condition, but also managing the complex logistics of activating our new protocols, while working with surgical teams, who were still learning to operate with our innovative equipment and procedures. The responsibility was enormous, encompassing not only the immediate goal of saving the child's life, but also demonstrating that our new department could handle the most challenging cases successfully. David appeared at the hospital within an hour of learning about the emergency, not because he had been summoned, but because he wanted to offer whatever support might be helpful during such a critical situation. His presence felt completely different from his previous hospital visits, reflecting genuine concern for my well-being and professional success rather than obligation or curiosity about my work environment. The surgical procedure required 12 hours of intensive monitoring and intervention, with our team working through the night to stabilize Marcus's condition and repair the damage to his cardiovascular system. My role involved coordinating between multiple specialists, while maintaining oversight of the complex monitoring protocols that tracked every aspect of the child's physiological responses to the treatment. When Marcus finally stabilized in the early morning hours, the successful outcome represented not only a saved life, but also validation that our new department's innovative approaches and specialized equipment could achieve results that might not have been possible with traditional treatment methods. The child's parents, Maria and James Patterson, expressed gratitude that transcended simple appreciation, recognizing that their son's survival had depended on the existence of exactly the kind of specialized care we had worked to establish. Dr. Warren arrived at the hospital as dawn was breaking, her expression showing both relief at the successful outcome and pride in the performance of our new department during its first major crisis. "Rachel, what you accomplished last night demonstrates exactly why we recruited you to lead this unit," she said with obvious emotion. "The coordination, the clinical expertise, the leadership under pressure. This is what exceptional healthcare looks like." Robert and David had remained at the hospital throughout the night, observing from the family waiting area, and occasionally speaking with other parents who were dealing with their own medical crises. Their conversations with these families had provided them with additional perspective on the importance and complexity of the work performed by pediatric medical teams, reinforcing their newfound appreciation for my professional contributions. The local news media coverage of Marcus's successful treatment highlighted both the capabilities of our new cardiac unit and the innovative approaches we had developed for handling complex pediatric cases. The attention was professionally gratifying, but more importantly, it demonstrated to the broader medical community that our department was achieving its intended goals of advancing pediatric cardiac care through specialized expertise and cutting-edge technology. 1 year after the opening of our cardiac unit, I received an invitation that represented the pinnacle of professional recognition in my field. The American Association of Pediatric Cardiac Nurses had selected me to receive their annual Excellence Award for Innovation in Clinical Practice, acknowledging the protocols and training programs we had developed at Cedar Point as models for other medical centers to emulate. The awards ceremony would take place in Chicago, with an audience of nursing professionals, physicians, and healthcare administrators from across the country. David immediately arranged to accompany me to the ceremony, expressing enthusiasm about celebrating my achievement and interest in learning more about the broader professional community that recognized and valued my expertise. Robert had also requested permission to attend the ceremony, explaining that he wanted to witness my recognition by the national medical community and to better understand the scope and significance of my professional accomplishments. His request felt genuine rather than obligatory, reflecting continued growth in his appreciation for my career and his desire to demonstrate public support for my achievements. The ceremony itself exceeded all my expectations for professional recognition and validation. The introduction preceding my award presentation detailed my contributions to pediatric cardiac nursing in language that emphasized both the technical complexity of my innovations and their practical impact on patient outcomes and quality of care. Standing at the podium to accept the award, I looked out at an audience that included some of the most respected professionals in pediatric medicine, people who understood the dedication and expertise required to excel in our demanding field. The moment felt like the culmination of everything I had worked toward throughout my nursing career, but it also represented a new beginning for what I might accomplish in the future. My acceptance speech focused on the collaborative nature of healthcare excellence and the importance of creating environments where professional expertise is recognized and valued, regardless of traditional hierarchies or social prejudices. The message was partly intended for the medical professionals in the audience, but I was also speaking to anyone who had ever been dismissed or undervalued based on assumptions about their background or capabilities. After the ceremony, David and Robert joined me at the reception, where they had the opportunity to speak with nursing professionals, physicians, and healthcare administrators who knew my work and reputation within the medical community. The conversations provided them with additional perspective on my professional standing and the respect I commanded among colleagues who worked in the most demanding areas of pediatric medicine. The flight home to Portland was filled with reflective conversation about how dramatically our family relationships had evolved since that transformative day at Riverside General Hospital. David's appreciation for my professional achievements had grown beyond simple pride to include genuine understanding of the complexity and importance of my work, while Robert had developed respect for my expertise that seemed both authentic and sustainable. More importantly, the changes in their attitudes had created space for me to be fully myself within our family relationships, no longer feeling the need to minimize my accomplishments or apologize for the demands of my profession. The confidence I had always possessed in my clinical abilities had expanded to encompass other areas of my life, including my willingness to expect and demand respectful treatment from family members. 6 months after receiving the national award, I was approached by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services about leading a national initiative to develop standardized protocols for pediatric cardiac care in rural and underserved communities. The project would involve working with medical centers across the country to establish training programs and implement innovative care models based on the successes we had achieved at Cedar Point. The opportunity represented everything I had ever dreamed of accomplishing professionally, with the potential to impact pediatric cardiac care on a national scale while establishing me as a recognized leader in healthcare policy and program development. But accepting the position would require relocating to Washington, D.C. and making significant changes to our personal and family life. David's response to the opportunity was immediate and unequivocal support, expressing excitement about my professional advancement and willingness to relocate his own legal practice to accommodate my career development. His enthusiasm felt genuine rather than dutiful, reflecting the fundamental shift in how he viewed my professional success and its importance to our shared future. Robert's reaction was equally supportive, acknowledging that the federal appointment represented recognition of my expertise at the highest levels of government and healthcare administration. The man who had once dismissed my career as worthless now expressed pride in my selection for such a prestigious and important position, recognizing that my professional achievements brought honor to our entire family. The decision to accept the federal appointment felt like the natural culmination of a journey that had begun years earlier with my determination to excel in pediatric nursing, despite the obstacles and prejudices I encountered along the way. The position would allow me to influence healthcare policy and practice on a scale I had never imagined possible, creating opportunities to improve care for children throughout the country. As I prepared for the transition to my new role in Washington, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred not only in my professional circumstances but also in my family relationships and personal sense of worth and capability. The woman who had once felt diminished and undervalued had discovered her own power and learned to demand the respect and recognition that her expertise and dedication had always merited. The conversation I had overheard in Robert's study felt like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. The dismissive comments about my worth and capabilities had been proven so thoroughly wrong that they now seemed almost absurd in their ignorance and prejudice. My husband's father had been forced to confront the reality that his daughter-in-law possessed exactly the kind of professional excellence and social contribution that any family should celebrate and support. David's evolution from passive acceptance of his father's attitudes to active advocacy for my professional success had restored my faith in our marriage and created a foundation for genuine partnership that had been missing for years. The man who now proudly introduced me as a national healthcare leader was the same person who had once seemed embarrassed by my nursing career, but his transformation felt authentic and permanent. The morning of our departure for Washington, I took one final walk through the pediatric cardiac unit at Cedar Point Medical Center, saying goodbye to colleagues who had become friends and reviewing the innovative programs we had developed together. The department would continue under Nicole's leadership, ensuring that our vision for excellence in pediatric cardiac care would be sustained and expanded, even after my departure. Standing in my former office, looking out at the healing garden where so many families had found peace during difficult times, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The professional recognition and personal vindication I had achieved exceeded anything I had dared to hope for during the darkest periods of feeling undervalued and dismissed. The federal appointment represented not only personal success but also victory for everyone who had ever been told they weren't worth investing in or supporting. My story had become proof that professional excellence and dedicated service eventually create their own opportunities, regardless of the prejudices and limitations that others might try to impose. As our plane lifted off from Portland International Airport, beginning the journey toward my new life and career in the nation's capital, I understood that the real victory wasn't just about proving Robert wrong or gaining David's belated appreciation. The true triumph was learning to value myself independently of anyone else's recognition, developing the confidence to pursue opportunities worthy of my abilities, and refusing to accept treatment that failed to acknowledge my worth and potential. The woman who had once stood outside a study door, devastated by dismissive comments about her value, had been replaced by someone who knew her own worth and was prepared to demand that others recognize it as well. The transformation had required courage, persistence, and the willingness to risk everything for the chance to become who I was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.